Hi, this is Jim Willie from the Hat Trick Letter, found on www.goldenjackass.com, and you are listening to Run to Gold.
Welcome back to RunToGold.com podcast. Today we have a special guest with us here, Anthem Blanchard. He's CEO of Numetra. Hi, Anthem.
Hey, Trace. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome. And this is the second or third time, I think. I remember our last interview was really good, where we talked about the secret decoder ring with the role that gold plays with performing mental calculations of value. So I'd like to have you back on so we can discuss a little bit about the Internet.
Well, thank you again for having me on board, and I'm glad I left a good impression the first time for your very attentive audience. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see. So now you're CEO of Numetra. What exactly does Numetra do?
That's right. Well, Numetra, we're enabling metering of the Internet, basically auditing and transparency, so that way customers actually get what they pay for in terms of bandwidth. So we're enabling a structure by which throughput can be matched. So supply of bandwidth can actually be matched with the demand usage of bandwidth, which will be a structure that will encourage and foster new innovation.
Right, because and I guess we should let the listeners know that I'm actually on the board of advisors for Numetra, so we discuss these economic issues every now and then, right?
That's right. Yeah, and it's a good point of disclosure, if nothing else. So,
people they just log on to the Internet and they think that I can just go to this website and I can just download all of this content, and they don't actually understand exactly how the Internet works. So when we're talking about metering the bandwidth, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, basically right now, Trace, the way the Internet is structured, the Internet is literally a network of networks, so hence the name Internet. So you have a variety of network carriers out there, everyone from retail network carriers, ISPs, such as Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, and such. And in essence, what we're seeing is lack of transparency in essence, and the issue is that none of these providers trust one another, and they can't trust one another because there's no visibility onto one another's network. So it's a bit like a model of an interstate system, if you will, in which there are no painted lines in some places. Kind of reminds me a little bit of going to Cairo and driving on the highways there, where people just neglect lines altogether. If you had that experience there, or some other third world locations. And in essence, in some places, there's arbitrary lines, and only actually some of the drivers can actually see the line, so to speak. So some traffic gets prioritized over other traffic, and essentially it's at the whim of that network operator. So it's complete administrative rule of law, in essence, on each one of these individual networks in terms of deciding what traffic should be prioritized and what traffic shouldn't. And ultimately, again, this was a fine model when you just had text mostly and very low bandwidth intensive type applications. But with the rise of video, with the rise of more interactive, massive multiplayer online games, very high intensive bandwidth applications, and customers' expectations increasing in terms of the value that they're obtaining from the Internet, it's putting an exponential type growth on demand. At the same time, I'm sure your readers are probably much more intimately aware than most, we have a credit market situation, a credit contraction right now, which means going to the bond market or raising capital by issuing more equity has become increasingly more expensive. It's another one of these models, these old legacy models that was really built on control of distribution that now is eroding away. Again, I guess you could expect nothing more from a legacy government-initiated model which the Internet, of course, is derived from.
Right.
We want to make the Internet a commercial application, in essence. Sorry, Trace.
And we're also seeing a lot of the excess capacity that was built during the tech boom. We're seeing that kind of cushion the effects, but eventually we're going to use up a lot of that excess capacity, and then would you call it a bandwidth crunch that might happen? Kind of like a margin call?
Exactly, or very much almost like what you can envision kind of what capital controls are designed to do from a financial system perspective, right? Being able to having to, I should say, restrict the flow of capital in order to keep the system sustainable, or at least survivable, I guess you could say. It's very similar on the internet where it'll work, but, that video will just get more and more buffered. The websites take longer and longer to load. Just getting worse and worse gridlock soon, 24/7 in terms of internet rush hour times.
And of course, we will want to make sure that websites like federalreserve.gov get high priority, and other websites which might have alternative points of view might get lesser priority. That could always happen when you start involving government rationing of these resources.
Well, that's right, and that's in fact actually what you're seeing happen to an extent on the internet right now, because there's a lack of transparency, a lack of consistent terms, and any type of third-party audit vehicle that can actually ensure that fair terms of service are applied across the board. Essentially, you have certain entities that are actually obtaining what they call paid peering, or a privilege priority over one carrier's network. So what we're aiming to do is very similar to FedEx in the sense that, if I'm Walt Disney, I can send FedEx probably cheaper than you or I can just because of the sheer volume, but you and I can still go to FedEx and use that service. We just obtain a retail price instead of a wholesale price.
The principle of free riders, people who don't pay but are still able to enjoy the benefits from the expended capital. The Internet's kind of really been built on this free ridership, hasn't it? In the sense that there are a lot of companies out there which free ride off of the expenses that other people have incurred.
Well, and again, like any subsidized model, you would expect nothing less. I mean, obviously, again, using an economic example, everyone's familiar with recently the Cash for Clunkers program that the government put out to subsidize car buying. Of course, people are going to go out and take advantage of it because it's a subsidy, in essence, being able to lower their cost point through a subsidy. So it only makes logical sense from a market standpoint that, the subsidies and inefficiencies will get exploited. That's essentially the issue right now, that there is no rule of law, and therefore, how can you have rights of any sort, let alone try to protect things like IP rights for any individual if you don't even know who the owners are? If there's no transparency, there's no communication within the distribution system or within the actual drivers in the distribution system, the content producers and syndicators and licensors, I should say.
Which I guess we should point that out, that you've actually been in negotiations with a lot of these big content producers like...
Well, I can't really, because of non-disclosure, I can't really go into the detail at this point, but, of the major studios, if you do consider someone like a DreamWorks to be major, we've been in pretty deep discussions with 5 of the major 7, some of the major associations revolving around both network carriers as well as content companies, and some of the major Tier 1 ISPs around the world. Tier 1 are known as the kind of the upper echelon in ISPs because they only actually have to, all their relationships are peering based, which means it's a barter system because their traffic is so immense that other networks can just partner with them because it's in their best interest. So they're basically like the major wholesale providers, you could say, over the internet.
For example, YouTube. We see everybody loves to watch the videos on YouTube. How much would you say the bandwidth costs to watch a 5-minute high-definition video? How much does that bandwidth cost about?
It really depends on how you look at it because, in essence, Google itself now has become, by some accounts, the largest ISP in the world in terms of traffic. And so, there is no transparency there. So there's no real way to say how much of a burden, that piece of content is placing on which network, nor is there really an ability to kind of figure out what the cost point is Google's standpoint. A very non-transparent world out there. What I can tell you, and what is known from our in-depth conversations, some of these ISPs for a number of years now, is that the capital expenditures that are getting taken on to try to increase capacity are actually much larger than the net income that these companies are actually bringing in. So again, it's an untenable situation. It's an extreme amount of load, essentially, that things like torrent applications and applications like best effort video across multiple networks, the strain that is placing on network carriers immense. Again, it's not a net profitable proposition when you after you take into account all costs.
Hey, if they're not making money, they're not going to be in business unless they get bailed out, right?
Well, that's right, and then I think we'll just see again the car analogy. It's like going 500 and then 1,000 and then 2, 3, 4, 5,000 miles after the car should have been serviced. So the oil starts sticking, the engine starts smoking. It might get you from A to B, but less and less reliable. And in essence, unless there's a way to basically increase the marginal utility of that bandwidth, then the ISPs essentially are going to be stuck with an increasingly commoditized product. And the media companies essentially will, and any producer of content, not just major media companies, any independent provider, they will not have a way to distribute their content better than a pirate could, non-authorized syndicator of content could. So, again, you can't protect property rights or rights to distribute certain content without actually having some rule of law, some structures in terms of service that are transparent and fair. It's not possible, and that's what we're seeing today, the effect of that.
And this could actually be enforced in a voluntary type of system, the distribution of intellectually created property, without having to rely necessarily on the fundamental force that comes from, say, a copyright or.
Absolutely. I mean, it's up to the creator of content. It's up to them in essence. So if someone saw in their best interest to be able to freely syndicate, then that's within their right. And obviously, there's certain, IP type laws that we have to uphold to in terms of jurisdiction. A few places maybe that the U.S. is still, very strong in terms of rights is really intellectual property rights. And so, again, fair use is something that, of course we have to abide by and we certainly do. But at the same time, there are a lot of people like yourself that understand that sometimes it's better to give some things out in terms of loss leader to ultimately get more cash flow long term.
What we're seeing is the newspapers are having a horrendously hard time with having any cash flow, and of course they've got just a worthless distribution model compared to what's available on the internet. But then
Sure.
We're also seeing music companies coming under increased threat, and now it's you can almost download movies as fast as you were able to download MP3s just a few years ago. And so the movie companies, they're the next ones to come under increasing threat because digital media ultimately wants to be free. It's going to be interesting to see how this shapes up with the internet service providers being able to generate a profit from extending the capital to lay the fiber and to bring the internet into people's homes or to broadcast it wirelessly, and then also for the content providers who provide the information and the content that makes the internet what it is, that pretty website or that useful website.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, again, keep in mind that, a text website, takes up, depending on the resolution, every 1 second of text website, megabits per second used, it's maybe 100th or 200th of, let's say, an HD quality video going through, or even an MP3, let's say. Again, some somewhat lesser quality form of audio. It's still acceptable to most. But, again, still fractions in terms of the bandwidth usage of video or other high-intensive bandwidth applications, again, like online gaming is a good example. And obviously the creative juices are flowing every day. And, again, with an expanding credit market, was easy enough to basically mask the inefficiencies and the deficiencies in the internet structure. But with that combination of new demand, increasingly new demand, people wanting to save costs on their cable, unplugging the cord, so to speak, just going to internet, the kind of strain that people are looking to, that the system is incurring now, largely due to people being in a savings mentality. The structure is not sustainable. It's meant for an investment cycle, not a savings cycle.
Like Skype, and I wrote an article about the wicked AT&T that's banned the Skype and the Google Voice applications from the iPhone, and so we're seeing the system come under increasing strain because AT&T they like to whine and cry that they're spending $18 billion building out their network, but at the end of the day, iPhone users use a lot of bandwidth, and they pay $80 a month. So, shouldn't they get the service they're paying for? But really, what should the cost of that service be? And that's what it's increasingly difficult to figure out because of this lack of transparency in the entire system.
That's right. And again, to be a tiny bit fair to AT&T in this case, and I think, you'll see this when, when the iPhone starts getting adopted onto other networks, start seeing similar strains, or just new PDA type smartphone devices, you'll see similar strains. And at the end of the day, if AT&T had a way to match, revenue that was earned from an application, like let's say on Skype when you use calling a landline phone or just a mobile phone or a phone number of any sort and charging, 1 cent per minute or a few cents per minute if international. Again, if there was a way to basically match, the actual supply and demand across multiple networks, then, I think AT&T would want to see as many, new applications that use bandwidth as possible, because then essentially in order for that application to survive, it would have to, achieve net profitability or be a loss leader, let's say someone like a Google, but, at least being able to have a net positive effect.
But instead, when we're able to play our super monkey ball and not have to pay for the cost of that bandwidth, in the sense that we're not paying on a metered basis like we do with minutes, but instead get a quote-unquote unlimited amount that just isn't there. It's kind of like socialist Russia. You have sausage for a ruble a link, but there's no sausage, and so we pay $80 a month for bandwidth, but there's no bandwidth.
Well, and people forget too, I think, Trace, that again, it's like how much people, the average American pays for cable or satellite subscription. Most Americans, only watch, say, 7-8% of all the channels that they subscribe to, and then maybe only for, a few hours, on the kind of higher end a day, per channel. So, which I still think is pretty incredible, but that is what it is. But, again, being able to see this trend, we really see it with the under 25s and the change in that demographic over the last 10, 20 years, just basically never getting cable. And to be able to have HD type video you get on satellite and cable, but to only have to pay for what you want to watch, and then more importantly, be able to buy it from a content producer that might not be able to afford to pay Comcast or Charter, $500 million or $1 billion or hundreds of millions a year for that spectrum. All of a sudden, that choice that we get from the text web will come to the video web with the quality that we get from current satellite and cable video distribution.
Yeah, and when you look at the alternatives now, you can go to the iTunes store and you can buy your favorite TV shows for $1.99 an episode, or you can pay $80 a month for cable, Comcast or whatever. How much TV do people watch, really? You could buy 40 episodes instead of subscribing to cable. And yet you're downloading that high-definition video, but how are those ISPs adequately getting compensated, the ISPs whose networks you use? And yet we don't have any way of really seeing that because of the lack of transparency in this market.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem, Trace, is that this is really the first time that you've had, a kind of a new media form, new media 20th century, let's say, innovations, or late 19th century, such as radio or television or cable or satellite. All of those examples, you've always had the suppliers, whether it's the antenna owner or the cable or satellite owner, basically working in tandem with the content distributor. So there was an alignment there. With the Internet, the way the structure is set at present, there is no possibility for such alignment because there is a lack of communication.
Which is good because it allows for a lot of this free Internet in the sense of anyone can write content and distribute it the way they want. I mean, free choice and free speech, if you will,
Right.
in the sense that anyone now has these tremendously powerful tools like WordPress, which is blogging software, that they can access this free open source software. They can launch a website, but how much is it going to cost when we start moving into into a more transparent cost structure? We don't know. And yet we like to consume our content. We like to watch our videos and read our websites and listen to our podcasts and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see how all of this shakes out and whether we'll still have this powerful medium for self-expression left over afterwards. Oh, I was just saying, we're starting to see the Internet begin to slow down and crumble relative to other nations. You look at South Korea, for example, or part of Western Europe, their cell phone networks are running at like 21 megabytes per second, where AT&T can't even get the iPhone up to 1 megabyte a second on their 3G. I mean, it's ridiculous. We're supposed to be this great first world country, and yet there are a lot of other countries out there which have far superior Internet and telecommunications available to their common citizens. And it's kind of like our bridges that are falling down. Our Internet infrastructure is falling down also.
Yeah, it is. It's falling down. And again, some of these some of those jurisdictions or those geographical regions that you mentioned, a lot of them have the luxury of having a lot of high density population centers very close to one another. Basically a lot of high per capita GDP in a pretty densely populated area. So obviously the U.S. is a pretty expansive geographical area. So in essence, I mean, my purpose, Trace, is I recognize that in the U.S. and often around the world, because of kind of a lack of education or miseducation, 90% of individuals in the U.S., roughly, in my estimation, obtain the majority of their knowledge from a video source and not by reading a blog, not by text. And sure, there are applications like YouTube and Vidler and websites like that where you can obtain video content. At the same time, for better or worse, I also believe that we live in a world that's 90% perception-based. So if one video doesn't have the same quality as, let's say, that HD newscast that you're able to get from your satellite feed, for better or worse, obviously I think worse, because truth it ends up not winning out over perception. That means 90% of the time people will tend to believe what has the best perception quality, what has the best video quality. So this, in my mind, actually is a net positive thing for freedom of choice and freedom of expression and getting, that message heard through more effective communication that the vast majority of at least Americans can relate to.
And I think we're going to see huge changes, creative destruction in a lot of other industries like education, for example. You've kind of hit on this, but with college professors now, they could just have their lectures video on the Internet, which Yale does for a lot of their classes. You can get a Yale education over the Internet now. You can go and watch the classes just online. Now, you don't get your sheepskin, which is where Yale still has their brand and they're able to charge their tens of thousands of dollars per semester. But we also have places like the Khan Academy where I think he's got 2 science degrees from MIT and a Harvard MBA, and he teaches subjects ranging from chemistry to differential equations to banking. And, I mean, these are high-quality videos where he succinctly teaches people all of these different subjects for free.
Wow.
And so,
wow.
I mean, it's amazing the opportunity that the internet gives in terms of educating people. And I think it is with the video that we're going to see this education really become available for the masses at a very low price compared to the traditional distribution models, like going to a college and sitting in a seat and paying tens of thousands of dollars, because at the end of the day, what value are those professors really adding when you can distribute it in a much more efficient medium, both as regarding to cost and geography and things like that. So, and time. So it's, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of change in not just the internet, but in a lot of our industries out there.
And I just wanted to, before I let you go, and thank you again for all of the time that you've given me and your time, Trace. It's appreciated. And before I go, I just wanted to say a little something to the listeners. In that, I know right now, obviously, people are kind of very doldrums, and things are getting worse and worse and worse. But kind of where I'm looking at things right now, at least if maybe I can be a bit of a beacon of light, so to speak. And that, I see we're on the edge, I believe, of a new renaissance period here, a new renaissance of expression. And I think it's actually quite exciting. So I think, there are enough people that are motivated and really, do recognize that in order for things to change, then, we have to do things in new ways. And that takes work. It takes time, patience, persistence, planning, passion, purpose. We're coming across a corner here, I think, that we can, just keep those P's in mind. Then in a few more years, I think things will be a lot rosier than they're being made out to be today, or indeed they are today.
Yeah, and, a lot of people, I think we just have so much negativity coming from the current press out there that people do need to just unplug it and enjoy life a little bit. and also the role that sound money plays in the creation of this brave new world that we'll be moving into. I know your father, he was really active in restoring the rights of sound money for Americans, out there waving his gold bar in his wheelchair until they until we got the laws changed that allowed Americans to own this dangerous yellow metal. So it's it is exciting to see these changes that are coming about, and I also agree with you. I think that we've got this new medium that allows for distribution and education on such a wide basis at such a low cost, and that increased investment or that increased human capital that will result from it will lead to even more advances and even more change that goes on with humanity, and it'll just continue speeding up. So it's a very exciting time to be in.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself, so I guess I'll leave it at that. So thank you again, Trace, for the time and for the opportunity to appear on your show.
You've been listening to the RunToGold.com podcast. This was episode 51.
This is John Rubino from DollarCollapse.com, and you're listening to Run to Gold.